Hey, what's going on, YouTube? It's the brain of the mainframe here, Nile, Scala, another exciting adventure of episode 114 of Crowdfunding Comics. And tonight we've got the ever-talented, the amazing co-host of co-hosts, a teen sensation because he's never going to grow old, Mr. Billy Tucci. How you doing tonight, sir?
Teen sensation, top 10. I'm doing pretty terrific. Old Bean, J.C. Vaughn.
J.C. Vaughn is in the house.
Hello, gentlemen.
Frozen Bald Guy.
AKA Frozen Bald Guy.
I'm going to go onto our page and like it.
You know, the more people that we get on this show means
FBG.
the more people that don't understand that reference.
I know. That was the very first show, right?
That was back.
It was actually it was episode 0. Remember?
Oh yeah,
it was the test.
Oh yeah, they're like, hey, who's the Frozen Bald Guy?
Well, I hope you're doing well, Old Bean.
Indeed.
I hope you passed along to our dear friend, Mrs. Johnson. It's her birthday today.
It is. Elva is 86 today.
86 years young.
And still working.
Oh, wow.
Still working. Well, she's not going to let no bug get her down, is she?
No, not at all.
Especially that Albert was an exterminator, wasn't he?
No. He sold spaghetti door to door.
Oh, okay. See, in Texas, though, I guess it's pretty good.
Yeah.
I guess you're up in the Northeast. That's not really going to work too well, but in Texas.
Not at all.
A spaghetti salesman.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, we are so jazzed for tonight, for our guest tonight. He's an immortal one. He is one of the greatest of all time. One of my favorites, a man, and I'll tell that story, who, if it were not for him and his creation, I would not be sitting here at this chair right now. So we'll get into that. But Nile, do you want to bring us in?
Yes, so without further ado, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Matt Wagner.
Hey!
Another bald guy, but I'm drinking bourbon, so I'm definitely not frozen.
There you go. Do you have ample amounts of booze during these trying times, my friend?
And I'm in Oregon, so both the liquor and pot shops are deemed essential.
There you go.
Nice.
Now,
there's no shortage of edibles.
Our liquor stores are still open, right, Jeff? Here on
I don't know because I don't consume the level that you do.
I know. That's why you more. I know. Hooray! There goes Brian Blevins. So, Matt, how are you doing, my friend?
We're doing well. I'm talking to you here from my home studio, and Billy and I were just matching notes before we went live here that for comic artists to have their home studio, it's kind of business as usual to a certain degree.
Yeah.
We're used to
absolutely
being holed up by ourselves and in our own heads, and on that level, it's not so bad. But my kids have come home. My son got out of New York City, and my daughter drove up from LA with her boyfriend, and they all brought animals. So we have quite a menagerie going on here.
Now, your son getting out of New York City, did he come just to visit, just for a family visit?
Yeah. And then it just extended into more. And his wife's a computer animator, and she's still there. Her parents live in Northern Virginia, not Northern, but Roanoke, Virginia, and so she went down there. So she's with her parents in Virginia, and he's out here with us. And of course, for the foreseeable future till things settle down a bit, we'll see.
We'll see.
We all get along pretty well, of course.
Well, you don't have a choice with all those animals in your house.
Yeah, we have 4 cats and a bulldog right now. So.
Now, do you normally have pets yourself, or are these all? Oh, okay, you do.
So, he brought his cat, she brought her cat, and her boyfriend brought his bulldog. So
he's put the.
I love bulldogs.
Now, are the cats all separate, or are they all hanging together?
Her cat's very reclusive, so he just kind of stays in their room. But he's an apartment cat, so he's used to being indoors. The other 3 cats. His cat has lived with us here at various times in Brennan's life, so they have a kind of equilibrium. They don't. I wouldn't say they love each other, but they stay out of each other's way, which is the best you could hope for, I guess.
Oh yeah.
And of course, when I say my son Brennan, my readers will know that my son is also my colorist for my projects. So we're all here working.
That's good, yeah, and especially like you said with us, you and I mean, he's been deposed from his home, but at least can he work from you in your studio? Does he have something set up? Oh, good.
He does. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, nice.
Yep. All working out okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Glad to hear. Just keep that social distancing going, and like you said, it's not really too different for you.
I will say we're all here in the house, so it's hard to stay really 6 feet apart from each other all the time. We do have dinner together every night, but for instance, I haven't really. My daughter's been here 2 weeks. I haven't given her a hug or a kiss. That seems awfully fucking strange to me, but it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's an interesting time, my friends. But, on a lighter note and a more exciting note, I'd like to know, and for the viewers out there that are currently watching, ones that are going to watch this recorded later on when they have the time, Matt, can you give us kind of your origin story and how you got into comics?
Sure. So I was an only child. I was born kind of late in my parents' life. They had moved out to a pretty rural setting when I was born in the middle of Pennsylvania. And so since I was an only child, we didn't have much video entertainment back in those days. I drew to entertain myself. And my mom was an English teacher and always encouraged me to read. And comics were both reading and drawing, all in the same little wonderful package. Yep. And unlike a lot of English teachers of her day, she didn't mind that I was reading comics so long as I was reading. She thought I'd grow out of them.
Yeah. Well, that certainly worked.
Yeah. And instead I grew into them, But I went to two different colleges. I went to a college, a liberal arts college in Virginia, James Madison University.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, I worked for the school newspaper, which was twice a week. I did a comic strip for them twice a week. Additionally, I was their graphic artist, which I always attribute as being one of the best learning experiences I had because they went to press twice a week on Wednesday and Sunday night. I had to show up at their offices around 9:30 at night. They already had the paper laid out at that point, and wherever there was a dead spot where they didn't have photo or copy or ad, I had to do a fill-in illustration. So for the very first time in my life, and I was probably 18 or 19 at that point, I wasn't drawing because I wanted to. I was drawing because I had to, and I couldn't leave till that was done. Usually take me about 2 or 3 in the morning. And boy, that was just that rigor and that discipline of sit down and get it done and don't fuss with it. Really benefited me in so many ways. And for that, I got a 1 credit A and $40 a month, which back in 1980 just seemed like I was on top of the world,
Yeah.
So you were like you were a year ahead of me. I started the college paper in '81.
Oh,
and doing and they actually pay me not to illustrate things, but learning layout and design, that stuff has never left me. My sensibilities all started with that. And stuff that you do in Photoshop, like manually airing copy, cutting the paste up apart and pulling it wider.
Waxer, do you remember a waxer?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Man.
For those that don't know, you would print out the article. And then you had this thing with a roller with molten wax, and you would scan it over this roller, and then you could place it on the layout board. And because it was wax, it wasn't glue. You could move it around if it wasn't quite right.
Yeah, and yet it would stay put.
It would stay put. Yeah. So then, following that, I after a couple of years there, just in a general art education, I wanted to concentrate a little bit more, and I transferred to an art college in Philadelphia. At that point, it was known as the Philadelphia College of Art. It's now merged with the Performing Arts School and is called the Philadelphia University of the Arts. But while I was there, I got on the elevator one day, and there was a dude wearing a Creation Conventions T-shirt. You East Coasters probably remember Creation.
Yeah.
At that point, they were the predominant line of conventions, and so we struck up a conversation. And they, too, were doing an in-school newspaper. It was called Duck Work, and it was a little bit of school news, but it was mainly duck cartoons. So my gig was I would do duck-themed movie posters. So I did, like, Raiders of the Lost Duck and Roller Duck and Duck Throat.
Really?
But then those guys
what did that poster look like?
And they were the initial founders of Kamiko. And
wow.
so about a year after they dropped out, I dropped out of school too, which of course was not a popular decision with my parents at the time. But that's kind of how I got started.
So
initially we all started, there were 4 of us, and we all started a black and white book. Mine was Grendel. And none of them really took off. They weren't much of a success, although I did get a lot of kind of good fan reaction to Grendel.
Sure.
And then Kimiko decided to move into color production, and they had just signed a contract with Chuck Dixon and his wife of that time, Judith Hunt, to do a series called Evangeline, about an assassin nun, an assassin for the Vatican in the future. And at that point, the big thing was gang printing, which for readers that don't know this, a printing press is so wide you can fit 2 comics on it side by side. So it benefited you financially to have 2 titles running at once.
Yeah.
And since Grendel of the 4 books was the one that had kind of gotten the most fan feedback, they offered me to develop something in color that turned out to be Mage. So I developed Mage, and had just kind of left Grendel behind as what I thought was a failed experiment. And then after Mage started to catch on a bit, I started getting a lot of feedback from readers saying, hey, what happened to Grendel? What happened to this story that you just abandoned midstream? So that's when I revamped Grendel to show up as a backup feature in Mage, and took it in a completely different direction, both narratively, visually. And from there, it just went on and on and on. But those were my initial steps into the field, my initial efforts as a published artist.
Did you have any things that didn't go that you sort of were developing before Grendel, or was Grendel you started with it and then it came?
Part of Grendel, yeah.
I remember I worked at Lone Star Comics at the time, and I remember one of the guys there was just absolutely nuts about Grendel and made us all read it and turned us all into Grendel fans.
Yeah.
I think about the time that Kimiko Primer came out.
Right, yeah, the number 2, yeah. Grendel started as a result of the fact that I had read a book in junior high school called Grendel. And it was by a fellow named John Gardner, and it told the traditional story of Beowulf, but told from the monster's point of view. It was sympathetic to the monster. And that, Beowulf and the Danes were, these fierce nationalistic assholes that were just intruding on his fucked up little weird existence in the swamp, and he struck out with them against them in rage. But again, it was sympathetic to the villain's point of view. And it was the first thing I'd ever read that kind of turned that heroic ideal on its head. Much later, I discovered the work of Michael Moorcock, and I would say the Elric saga had a huge effect on me. That here you had this character that was you kind of sided with and kind of loved, but he did a lot of horrible things, and it was really my first exposure to an anti-hero. So that's all those things kind of added up to the creation of Grendel.
When you revisited Grendel, what had happened for you in terms of your growing sophistication?
Why did it become that instead of what it was, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of that was the fact that I was all of a sudden relegated to a 4-page installment every issue as opposed to a full issue. So I had to squeeze a whole issue's worth of story into 4 pages. And I figured the way to do that was to do it in prose fashion. And so avoid the traditional breakdowns of panels and captions and balloons, and really just kind of treat the whole page as a narrative moment, and then fill that in with floating caption boxes. And to take this approach that this was a story that had already been told to the world that it existed in, that it was already a famous story. So it was treated almost as in a historical context, as opposed to something
almost like a documentary.
Yes, correct. Yeah, as opposed to unfolding for us in an immediate sense. You were supposed to assume that the people that exist in this world already knew all about Grendel, as we would with any sort of major event that happened in our world. So that was the big impetus in that. And the other great thing about that was it was the polar opposite of what I was doing in Mage, which of course was just all dialogue. There were no caption boxes. There was no internal narrative. There was no omniscient narrative. And so, for me as an artist, it was just a fertile ground to really try these two different narrative approaches and really just go to town with both of them in every issue.
Did you find that you, rather than a collaborator, that you were pushing yourself you did something cool on one and then it resulted in something cool on the other thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and I've gone back and tried to figure out whether what happened in Mage that issue affected what happened in Grendel that issue. I don't think it really did. I think I was able to keep them separate. So, I mean, they're so obviously opposite. Grendel's a very dark. I always say Grendel is about great potential that atrophies and doesn't work out, whereas Mage is about hope and about growing up whether you want to or not.
Yeah, those are pretty good summations of that. Do you find that your fans have a favorite Grendel?
Oh yeah, they all do. Yeah. I don't. The concept is my favorite. I keep coming back to Hunter Rose because everybody fucking loves Hunter Rose.
Of course. As well they should.
Yeah, I have mine stuck right there.
Yeah, there you go. Where's mine? Mine's right behind me here too.
I
and he's such a, I always point out to people that both Hunter Rose and Hannibal Lecter appeared in print at the same within a year of each other.
Wow.
And
nice.
there are extreme similarities. This very erudite monster.
Yeah.
That you can't help but admire, but you can't help but fear as well. So
yeah, I think that's pretty good. Do you the Devil by the Deed graphic novel came out first at Comico and then it's been reprinted since then too, right?
Yeah, a couple times. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were there any differences in the editions of that?
This coloring. We had it recolored when we first reprinted it at Dark Horse. Of course, after Comico went down, I took the entire franchise to Dark Horse. I've been with them many, many years now, and no complaints. Dark Horse has always been incredible to me. But we had it recolored, and then we did the two Grendel Black and Red, White, and Black, and Black, White, and Red series. Yeah. And it just seemed like that so fit his narrative vibe that then we had it recolored again in the Black, White, and Red scheme. And that's the way, that's the way I prefer it now. But, things evolve.
Absolutely. Just a couple of things is I had said earlier when I was introducing you or before Nile introduced you that if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here.
Sorry, man.
Interestingly enough, and Old Bean, here's an interesting story from my local comic shop. Once I moved back out to Long Island, was Bob's Amazing Comics in Sayville, New York.
Indeed.
And there's a photo. He always had a photo in his wall of fame, and there was Matt Wagner signing at his store on Long Island in 1985.
Wow.
You know why I have the fondness for Bob's store that I never saw, right?
No.
He's the only guy who advertised both in the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide and the Overstreet Indian Arrowhead Price Guide.
Yeah.
Two books that just do not meet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even know there was an Overstreet Indian Arrowhead Price Guide.
Oh, there still is. No, I don't know. Yeah. But I love that, and Jeff was friends with Bob, and I was. But a really interesting story is that it was 1988, and I was at the Fashion Institute of Technology, and I was in school, and I'd started getting back into comics because I saw the Amazing Spider-Man number 300 that someone brought in, and being a kid that grew up reading. Loving John Romita, Joe Kubert. They probably were my favorites, and I remember when Dave Stevens first came out in 81 with The Rocketeer, and I just blown away by this. And I really got away from comics because I'm like, I could never be John Byrne. I could never do what George Perez does. I could never do this, and because it was such a different style. I tried it, and I think all through high school and then into college, going for art school, the better I got at art, I guess, the less confident I got, the more aware I became of other good artists, of better artists, of real artists. And then that's teacher,
that's healthy, man.
What?
That's healthy.
Yeah, yeah. And I was just like, I'm like, I can't do this. Well, maybe I'll do fashion illustration. So I was in fashion illustration. And my teacher's like, Billy, you should draw comics. And Karen Santry, I'll never forget it. And she's like, I'm like, yeah, but, and now I'm thinking George Perez, you know, I'm thinking Ramita, you know, Buscema, you know, and she's like, no, because there is this book that reminds me of your art. It's very similar to your art. And that was the Christina Spar Grendel miniseries that she had. It was probably 2 years old. Yeah. Cause I think it came out in 86.
Yeah.
And she's like, look at this, the Pander brothers, you can do this. I'm like, wow, there are comics that look like this.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm like, wow, that is kind of cool. It's not the same old how to draw comics the Marvel way, you know, type of thing. And it really inspired me. And she is one of my favorite characters. And I know you guys were talking about who's your favorite Grendel, and mine's definitely Christina Spar. And I just love her. I think she's so elegant. And the other cool thing is that series, the initial series, took place in 2022.
Yeah.
So that's like 2 years away. So I am going to tell you now that I'm going to petition you to see if I can do some sort of crossover with you within the next 2 years, and have she and Christina Spar, because we've caught up. And my character, she is with Return of the Warrior, our new book that I'm finishing up now, is it takes place 25 years after the initial story. So my character Anna is now like in her late 40s. She's a mom. You know, she's progressed with time. So I'd love to talk to you about that in greater detail.
I love real-time occurring in comics, you know, or the progression of time. You know, I also so Billy, you mentioned there about, you know, you looked at other artists that you liked, and you felt like, well, I'm not good enough. You know, again, I think that's a thing every artist should harbor in themselves. You know, this need to never be satisfied, this need to always push ahead. You know, everybody says to me, "What's your favorite work of yours?" And I always say, "The next one." If you come to my house, you know, I'm here in my studio, and I have, you know, some of my gear and paraphernalia and merchandising and shit up in my studio, but I have absolutely none of my own art up on display in the house. And the reason is I couldn't bear to look at it like that. Every day, you know, I would only look at what I didn't like about it. You know, I would only look at like, yeah, that hand just wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And that's all I'd be able to focus on, you know? So I can't have that.
That's why it's tough to revisit your books, because like we're putting together a collected edition of the first series, the first 13 issues. I'm like, oh my God. What was I thinking?
No, I mean, but it's evolution, though. It's evolution of your skill.
It's a progression. Yeah, it's a progression. You know, it's your progression. It's your growth. It's your life, you know?
Yeah, and what I loved about it, though, is that passion, though. I think I'm a far better draftsman today. I think I'm a far better storyteller. But there's just that passion that you have in the early days, you know what I mean? Yeah. And there's just something that's just so – and it's kind of cool that I walked away from She, and you've done miniseries and things like that instead of being, you know, doing the same. We had Eric Larson on last week, and he's on issue 250 now, drawing it.
251.
It's like, wow, 250, 251?
251 he's working on.
So you know what I mean? It's like,
whatever it takes.
Holy cow! Continuing to do it. My ADD, I couldn't do it. There's no way I could do it.
So in regards to that, you know, looking at somebody else's work and thinking, you know, I'm not worthy. You know, many years ago, I had started a kind of different version of Mage, long before Mage ever came to fruition in its real form. And I will freely admit I was nowhere near ready to do something of that scope, and I just wasn't good enough. But you know, Billy, you know, you got high hopes, and you got great plans, and you got the passion, like you said. Yeah. So it was a story about the return of King Arthur, but it was just ordinary. It was set in the future, and he fought mutants, and you know, there was he wore a cape, and then DC Comics announced they were going to do Camelot 3000, and I thought, oh well, fuck that. You know, there goes that idea, and that Brian Bolland guy draws a little bit better than I do, and then it came out, and it just meant nothing to me. You know, it was certainly beautiful, and it was certainly professional in every regard, but you know, it was standard superhero fare. It was King Arthur was dressed like Superman. He was wearing a red, yellow, and blue costume.
Yeah.
And, there wasn't, aside from the sex change on Tristan, there was no real difference. They wore armor and they had swords. And at that stage of my life, I was, in my young 20s, and I was just like, I don't know anybody that wears armor or has a fucking sword,
Yeah.
Really? Where were you hanging out?
As I know, wear shitty T-shirts and run around the alleyways in the city. And, we don't have any swords, but, I knew a guy that had a baseball bat stuffed into the front seat of his car.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, maybe there's another way to do this. And that's when I kind of stumbled on the idea. I will say it wasn't that purposeful at the beginning, but I stumbled on the idea of, if you're going to remake a myth, you need to personalize it.
Mm-hmm.
And, Mage is very obviously an allegory of my own life. But told in this broad, fantastic fashion. I don't really think I run around and battle ogres and dragons, but don't we all batter ogres and dragons in our personal life in some metaphoric fashion,
Have you been on Twitter? Oh my God. Crazy.
Welcome to the internet.
Yeah.
Welcome to the internet.
Well, thank God that didn't exist back then. But it was only later that I realized that that's not that unusual. I mean, one of the most obvious examples is Charles Schultz was Charlie Brown. If you ever knew Dave Stevens when he was live, he was Cliff Stevens. He was Cliff here, I always tell people, whether you can see it or not, Jeff Smith is Bone. Okay. A lot of very, very famous cartoonists locked into or stumbled onto drawing some sort of narrative version of their own lives. And, luckily that happened for me as well.
Yeah.
So Billy, you're she?
No, I'm Pete Denise. I'm the cop. That was me. I used me as Pete. I wanted to use my friend John Tartaglione, and he had to work. So I'm like, I'll draw me. I got to do this panel. I'll make him look like me. Make him look like me.
But there's got to be
handsome though, like tall and
personality for sure, right? I mean,
yeah, that part.
Yep.
Like there's a scene when she first meets him, and
it doesn't have to exactly look like you.
Yeah, no, but it was like what I wished I looked like at my peak. Yeah. and like Nile's height. Nile's like 6'2" or something like that.
There you
go. But
strangely enough, as a writer, I've used Billy. I to my artist, I once described a police detective. I said he's very sharp, but he has Billy's attention span.
Well, Matt, think when it comes to weapons, how did you develop? And you were really young. Where did you come up with a concept for Grendel's the double bladed?
Everything kind of stemmed from some event in my life. Like, for instance, when Kamiko first started up, we were still doing the black and white books and shit. The office was in a suburb just outside of downtown Philadelphia called Norristown. And for a while I worked as their office grunt. I would, answer mail and do copies and, run off Xeroxes, whatever. And one day, one of the guys came back and said, "Hey, there's a service station down the road here where a guy's got a mint Edsel for sale." So we went down there and looked at it, and I took a few photos, and boom, that became a character. Similarly, around this same time, somebody I knew, and God, I can't remember who it was now, but had a sword cane. Had somehow located an antique sword cane, and you twisted the thing on the handle, and this blade came out. And I thought, damn, that's cool. When I first started to develop Grendel, I wanted him to have this kind of satanic persona, this devilish persona, in the sense that, the devil's always pleased to meet you, hope you guess my name. The devil's a gentleman, And so I knew I didn't want it to just be a sword. The devil has to have a fork. I knew I couldn't get 3 blades in there and look very cool, but 2 blades could pop out. Conceivably, conceivably. So that's how, But almost everything in my early work is not even my early work now too. Is just kind of like stuff I see. Stuff There's an old famous Gone Wilson cartoon of a artist at an easel, and he's painting these horrible monsters and shit. And he looks over his shoulder at this little kid who's kind of scared. And he says, "Listen, kid, I paint what I see."
So when you have Mage and it's resonating, the critical acclaim on Mage, did you perceive it as being there pretty quickly on Mage? Because we in the retail side of it, we did.
The thing that worked about Mage was it was my growing up process. I mean, as Kevin Matchstick comes into his power and realizes his role as a hero, you see me becoming a better creator, like by page practically, you know.
Sure.
And so that resonated, you know.
I remember talking about your storytelling for the first time during that, as I was maturing as a reader, understanding the difference in from what you had done early on to what you were doing then. And once you start seeing it too, it does become a page by page thing.
Yeah. There's an immediacy to it as well, you know. And again, because I was, again, with that first one, I wasn't quite aware of how autobiographical I was making it. I was just doing it, you know. It was only with the second and third one that I grabbed the reins of that autobiography harder and made it more purposeful.
That sounds right.
But yeah, you just, you know, I just started shaving away the stuff that I thought wasn't necessary, like captions, like exposition, like stuff that didn't involve immediately what was going on in the scene. And so, as a result, it became very cinematic. You know, it became like watching an animated film almost. You know, a lot of the color. You know, I was coloring that myself, and I'll never forget this. When this one night, I had a group studio in Philadelphia with a group of guys: Bill Willingham, Rich Rankin, Neil Vokes.
Wow, great guys.
And they all kind of lived a little farther away. I was about, I don't know, 10 blocks away from the studio. So I was in the studio more often and at weirder hours. So one night I had to, I think it was on the 4th issue, and I had to color that issue. And these were all hand-painted colors. I won't go into the long, laborious process that was, but it was a very strange process as opposed to what we see now done in comics. But I got there late at night, and I had just kind of started to realize what color could be. And I remember I rolled myself a couple of joints and I sat over in the corner and I was there for about 5 hours working on this. And all of a sudden it all just opened up to me. And I was like, damn, this is it. It's working. It's working. I can get it. I understand. And I will say, you know, especially for that first Mage series, it drew a lot of my color inspiration from those Max Fleischer Superman cartoons.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Nice.
The dramatic side lighting, the super rich undershadows, you know.
There's really spectacular. Any aspiring artist,
masterpieces.
Yeah,
truly.
Yeah, I got a question about the colors. Going back to what you were talking about the discipline and rigor you got out of the college newspaper, having to do the spot illustrations on a deadline. Did coloring the old-fashioned way make you more adept at the computer age of coloring, or did it affect your sensibilities, I guess?
Just sensibilities. I'm an absolute fucking Luddite when it comes to the computer age of coloring. I'm still analog all the way, baby.
That's why you had a son.
I always joke that I've been in this business long enough that I was able to breed and raise my own colorist.
That's phenomenal.
And he did a great job doing it.
Yeah.
Now, did you do, if I may, Obeen, just to get back to the technique of that, because the first couple of issues of She that we did were hand colored as well, and we basically took Xeroxes on cardstock, you know, whatever it was, 10 point, whatever the heaviest paper Kinko's had, and exactly, and we used Dr. Martin's dyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what you used? What did you use?
I was all right. So since you opened this portal, Billy, we'll go down that hole. So I used a process called blue lining, which was popular in those days. So what happened with that was there was a company that sold this chemical, and so with every page they would run 2 copies, one a clear acetate version and one a negative version. So you would take this paper and you would treat it with this chemical. You would lay down the negative version. You'd expose it to light. I went to Woolworths and bought a sun lamp.
Okay.
That I mounted on the wall, and I would point down at the paper I was using, expose it for 5 minutes. You peel that negative off, and here's a blueprint version of the artwork.
Oh, wow.
And then you just colored in the blank versions, right? I mean, the blank parts. Mm-hmm. And then they would sync that up with the black line, the overlay. Mm-hmm. And there you had the finished art. Now, so far as that airbrush effect that I was able to get back in those days, I was using something called, I can't remember what it's called, but Pantone or one of those design markers had made an airbrush that worked off markers. So it was it was like a little gun, right? That went down, it had a tube that went down to whatever air source you were using. Initially, I just used canned air, but then later I got myself a real generator.
Nice.
And you could pop in these markers, and this gun would blow a stream of air across the marker and spit it out in airbrush style.
Oh,
and it
wow.
wasn't anything big, right? Because it didn't have a broad enough range. But when you're working comic book reproduction style, for the backgrounds on these panels, it was perfect. And you didn't waste any time because cleaning out your airbrush, because no paint ever went through the gun. It was just blowing a stream of air across the tip of the marker. And so, boom, I could switch off markers left and right. I started keeping like my fresh markers over here that would give me a nice smooth, and my worn out markers over here that would give me a spittle kind of version. So that's how all that worked. And I hired a couple of buddies of mine from art school to lay down frisket and cut out they're basically what today is called my flatters, and they would cut out the backgrounds, and I would peel these off and spray in the background. I'd start from the back and move forward, and then I would paint in the figures.
Wow.
That's really cool. That's a hell of a process.
Back then, yeah. I mean, and you're doing
a lot of late nights and a lot of stimulants.
That's the old-fashioned layering, which we do digitally now.
Yep.
Now, let me ask you a question.
Okay, here's a funny story, though, about that. The final hold that for a second now. The final issue of Mage. So at that point, does everybody know Joe Matt, very famous autobiographical cartoonist?
Yes.
Published mainly by Drawn Quarterly at this stage. He was a college chum of mine, and for the last couple issues, he was my color assistant. He would chip in on stuff. So the last issue, it was double-sized. We had a fold-out. It was a big deal. And we got down to the wire on getting this thing in, and we stayed up all night. We were literally up all night. We were there all day the next day, and we rushed out to the train station in Philadelphia. We hopped on the train. We drove out to we took the train out to Norristown, which is where the Comico offices were. Bob Schreck, who worked at Comico at that point, picked us up at the train station. We went to the offices. We laid in all the page numbers by hand. Ooh. We packed it up at FedEx, and we whipped over to FedEx on a Friday evening, and we got there 3 minutes before they closed.
Wow.
Isn't it funny the way you remember stuff like that?
Yeah.
Like the
Overstreet. It's like a victory,
Oh yeah. The Overstreet Guide going to press. And in those days, it was probably like a 900-page plus book.
That's a bigger prospect, but yeah.
And I would be hauling ass to BWI because their FedEx closed the latest.
Yes.
Yeah. I did that with
and of course, it was bags of SideQuest discs.
Oh my God! Yeah. I have issues on SideQuest. My God, and I have no attachments to it for it.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you there earlier. What did you want to ask?
Oh, no, actually, but first, let me go. We just got a super chat from TJ James who asks, any chance of a Hunter Rose Grendel mini with him meeting up with Sherlock Holmes or even a gumshoe like Mike Hammer or Sam Spade?
Thanks, but no.
Are you drinking again, TJ? Come on,
TJ.
TJ.
The thing about Hunter Rose and Billy, what would make a crossover with She kind of difficult is they both have extremely kind of distinct careers. Hunter is only Grendel for about 4 or 5 years. Yeah. And I've now told a ton of Hunter Rose stories, so I'm kind of running out of space. Christine Spar there's no more Christine Spar stories really, because you never see a moment where she isn't Grendel. Every time she was Grendel, you saw it already.
Yeah.
She did not lead extra adventures. She used that persona simply to enact her revenge for the death of her son, and it consumed her and destroyed her. So I get a lot of requests for other people. Give me more Christine Spar stories. There really aren't any.
It's such a beautiful.
I tend to leave my characters dead when they die.
But even Hunter Rose if I may, Bean.
Yes,
I just love it, and that you created this character. So young when you were young, and we were all young, I guess, back then. But I just love what a design from the mask. I mean, what an elegant character.
Okay,
that costume in a time when people are trying to add, like you said, capes and all this crap. You really went minimalist.
Yeah. I went minimalist. Grendel was semi-inspired by two Italian comics characters that were also anti-heroes. Diabolique. I don't know if you know a famous film by Italian horror filmmaker Mario Bava called Danger Diabolique. And there was another one named Criminal with a K. And they were both gentleman thieves. They both wore skin-tight costumes, very minimal. I very much drew my inspiration from those guys. I hadn't really seen those comics per se, but I had seen descriptions of them in a big resource book that was popular at the time called the World Encyclopedia of Comics. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to pare things back. I was also always a big fan of Zorro and stuff that the kind of swashbuckler ideal, and And I guess additionally, I didn't want to draw a whole lot of shit. I wanted a nice simple costume that would be easy to draw.
Now, when you were designing these characters, so even like Mage, Grendel, now with our past interviews with other creators, I mean, some of these ideas they had as young children that evolved. Were these two characters something that you thought of prior to, or just when you were into it?
No, it was just kind of at the time.
Yeah.
Again, when I had an opportunity to first develop Grendel, you got to remember there were no anti-heroes in comics back in those days. There really weren't.
The Punisher was it.
Yeah.
Punisher was it. But
he was a bad guy then. Still, I don't even think he was a.
Yeah, he was a villain, pretty much.
Yeah, the villain.
But the idea of doing a character that was not super heroic, that was the bad guy, Marvel had tried a couple things with supervillain team up. Mm-hmm. DC had a brief run of a Joker comic. None of them really took off because it always seemed like that guy's not the point of the story. Batman's the point of the story. The Marvel heroes are the point of the story. I wanted to do one where the bad guy was the point of the story. And again, those anti-hero sources I mentioned earlier were a big influence on me, and I decided that based on that Grendel novel, that I would make my hero sleek and handsome and stylish, and I would make I'd make my villain sleek and stylish and handsome, and I would conversely make my hero ugly and brutish and savage. And that's what led to Argent, both Hunter and Christine's arch nemesis in both tales.
So I've got a question. Given what you've just said about the various times of Hunter and Christine, and that's the crossovers you have done with other people, specifically Batman and the Shadow. Just outstanding. And I remember when I heard that it was going to be Grendel's Shadow, I was like, oh, let it be Hunter Rose. So my question to you about them was, in each of those instances, it had been a while since you had done Hunter Rose Grendel.
Mm-hmm. Yet
it felt like, at least for the reader, that you really just dropped back into that voice.
It's pretty easy for me. It's almost a muscle memory.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same way you know how to ride a bike or shoot a bow or anything you do that you maybe haven't done in a while. But I always say that every time I come back to Hunter, he's a little bit more evil than last time I saw him.
I get that.
And there's not, similar to what Billy was talking about there with I've had a lot of offers to team up Hunter with other characters. After Batman, Grendel, the first one and the second one were so successful. But I felt like, well, where do I go after that? I mean,
how did it come about at first?
Yeah,
the first one?
For the Shadow, Dynamite suggested it, but that's because they knew that I'm just a Shadow geek. There's one character that meant probably more to me than almost any other commercial character. I love Batman, I love Superman, I love a lot of the traditional characters, but the Shadow struck me at a stage in my fandom that was very significant. My parents were older. They dated back from World War II themselves. They used to tell me stories about listening to the Shadow on the radio themselves and being thrilled, and then when I was about 12 or 13, DC announced they were going to do their initial Shadow series, Denny O'Neil and Mike Kaluta, and they had these promos with the Shadow, and he had 245s, and same as there weren't any anti-heroes in those days, superheroes didn't use guns, and I was like, who's this guy with the guns? What the hell, and he seemed so mysterious and merciless, and what's up? And so then that series came out, and I loved it. Of course, Mike's Denny Denny has a kind of underrated contribution to that series, and how deftly he summarized that character into pretty short adventures.
Oh yeah.
But of course, Mike's artwork was just phenomenal.
Incredible.
Yeah. But at the same time, Pyramid Books, a small imprint of, I forget what larger publisher, started reprinting the Shadow pulp novels with these just incredibly beautiful covers by Jim Steranko.
Yeah.
And at the same time, all of a sudden you could get a lot of Shadow adventures on LP vinyl. So in all in the space of about 2 or 3 years, I got just hammered with a lot of Shadow stuff and really fell in love with the character. And, Dynamite knew that. And so where could I go that would be better than Batman? Well, it was the Shadow. And now there's probably nowhere left for me to go to team up Hunter Rose.
How did the Batman crossovers come about?
Batman crossovers came about as a result of Kimiko forming a very kind of ill-fated co-publishing relationship with DC. That's documented elsewhere. I won't really get into that. But they approached me and said, what do you think about doing this? Of course, that wasn't done in those days. There were no, Marvel crossed over with DC on a couple of instances. It had never been crossed over with an independently owned character, ever. Yeah. And when they offered me this, I knew that was a great opportunity. Okay, so that almost didn't turn out to be as cool as it was, because the Christine Spar series had just came out. And I thought, well, that's the way to go. That was so popular, there needs to be a female Grendel, right? So it didn't even occur to me that they should exist in the same universe. And so in my initial pitch, it was a female Grendel, but Grendel was a fictional phenomenon in Batman's world, in Gotham and all that. And this one character becomes obsessed with it for a variety of reasons. And I will be the first to admit, it was overwrought and just horrible. It was just the wrong way to go. And luckily, my editor and since my sister-in-law Diana Schutz said to me, this is just stupid. Don't do Hunter Rose. He's just like Bruce Wayne. And all of a sudden, boing, a light went off my head, and I was like, oh yeah, she's right. He's just like Hunter. He's just like a dark version of Bruce Wayne. So that's how that, then all of a sudden everything made sense to me. And of course, I always have to have a human element in things. So I styled it to have it really be the story of these two women that were close to each other, and how that reflected these larger than life characters. But yeah, that almost didn't work out at all.
It was really groundbreaking in what you mentioned about the rarity, let's say, previously unheard of teaming up a indie character with one of the well-established characters like that. It was every place that I was a regular at my comic shop at that point, and it was very popular. Did it do well from your side of things? I mean, well,
of course, the publication of it got tied up in Kimiko's downfall, but yeah, ultimately it did very well, and then of course it led to the second crossover. You know, it did so well that I at that point I suggested to DC, hey, did great on this one, let's do another one. To which they said, sure, go ahead.
That's incredible.
And in fact, that then by that point I'd already taken Grendel the Dark Horse, and we did the War Child series. So I had Grendel Prime in existence at that point, who was a character who didn't even exist when I did the first one. And that gave me the opportunity to, everything I've ever done with Grendel is turn it over, make it different, turn it over, make it different. Don't do the same thing. Don't do the same thing. Don't do the same thing. And the fact that I could take this first series, which was a very dense psychodrama and very layered with character and had a very kind of noir sort of approach to things and a noir color scheme and a noir art scheme. All right, let's bring in Grendel Prime. Let's just make it just an action fest, lots of hitting and banging and smashing and just go absolutely the other direction. So for my money, those two kind of stand as kind of an alpha and omega of what I could do with that. And I feel like I did it.
Yeah, I think so. Really? Did you know that Batman Grendel, aside from being the first crossover with a DC character and an indie character, has another first to its distinction?
What was that, Jeff?
Nile, do you have that?
Yes, I do.
Just give me the last one. Oh, yeah, sure, yeah.
It is the first time that we had an intercompany crossover on the cover of the Overstreet comic book race cover.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah. Now, Overstreet number 42, it's the Hero Initiative version.
Yep.
It's legitimately rare, and I think that I got no opposition to the approval because it was for Hero.
Wow.
DC's been great to work with over the years on that, but I can see them put on the brakes if not.
Yeah.
And boy, that was just a killer cover. And
what a great! That's one of the best covers. Definitely one of the best.
It's in my top list. So, but at any rate, when they told me you would be on tonight.
I have if may go back and I'm glad you mentioned the Hero Initiative, and we want to talk about the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund too and all. But I have a question to you about the Shadow series. I didn't see it, so I apologize for it. Does it take place during the 30s or the 40s?
Yeah. Okay. For my money, even though I when Howard Chaykin did his famous short series of the Shadow and the
Blood and Judgment.
For my money, most popular culture characters really exist best in the time period they're created in.
Yeah.
And, the Shadow just doesn't work now, Here's just a couple of illustrations of that. The Shadow only works in a time and day when there were still shadows in big cities. I don't know when last time you were in New York, but the entire city's lit up like a fucking pinball machine.
Yeah, and there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah, right. It also only works when every man on the street is wearing a hat.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like, who's the bozo in the hat?
Yeah.
So I came up with this, little MacGuffin thing to throw Hunter Rose back in time. And, I had it at a point where he was particularly kind of bored with what was going on in his life at that point. So he shows up back in the 30s in New York, and he's like, hey, whole new world to conquer. I'm on it,
Yeah.
Of course, things don't work out for him.
It was. Sorry, this is the geek out portion of the show. It was so good.
Yeah, thanks, man. I will point out, beautifully colored by my son.
Was that the first time, or did you guys have worked together previously for that?
I think that was the first time he colored he had done a bunch of my covers. The first time he had done a page-to-page narrative. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and he started really good and has gotten way better too.
Oh yeah.
Which has just been amazing to watch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we've got a question from Will Mahoney here asking, "Hey Matt, loving Devil's Odyssey, is Maged Hero Defined getting a hardcover to match 1 and 2?"
Well, all that's kind of on hold, like everything else. Yes, it will. When I started The Hero Denied, of course, I had to get The Hero Discovered and The Hero Defined back into print. and enough time had passed that it's a different kind of marketing world than it was last time I'd worked on Mage. So we needed to have it as basically a continuing volume series, you know. So you would have, we put it out in 6 volumes. So The Hero Discovered, the first story was in 2 volumes. The Hero Defined was in 2 volumes. Then we later collected The Hero Denied into 2 volumes as well, making a total of 6 volumes. As a result of having that stuff on the market, I got to kind of sell those through a bit first before we move into a fancy hardcover edition. But yes, that is the plan, of course.
Awesome.
I need to match up with the other hardcover editions that came previously.
That's great.
Absolutely. So now, you know, I mean, man, we've had you on for an hour already almost.
I'm a yucky fucker.
No, we love it. We love it. You know.
Yeah, and we've got one of our producers who has some great question for you too. If you guys don't mind, I'd like to bring him back in.
Sure, yeah.
Also a huge fan of yours, Matt. Mr. Blevins.
Hey, how's it going?
How you doing?
Hey man, I'm doing well. Yeah, I got a bunch of crazy fan questions. You know, I guess you know, first and foremost, you know, when you were doing the covers for the new Batman, when they were getting ready to do the you know, the big Jason Todd Red Hood, you know, storyline reveal, like I guess number one, like, what was the story behind the big lightning, you know, cover, the initial cover, you know, that was just super incredible, of them fighting, you know, on what looks like a rooftop with the lightning striking behind them. And also, like, when you did the cover for 638, which was the big reveal, you know, you had the main cover, and then you also had the, you know, the second print variant cover. Did you know that it was going to be second printed automatically? Did they tell you that, you know, hey, look, I need you to do both of these, or what's the stories behind those covers?
Okay, well, let's start with the first part of that. I will say, you know, when you're working as a cover artist on a regular series like that, you almost never get to read the entire script. You know, you're given a short little, here, basically this, and you know, they might shoot an image idea at you, maybe not, maybe it's up to you to come up with that. So I was told, hey, we're bringing back the Red Hood. All right, well, I know what the Red Hood looks like. He's a guy in a tuxedo with a red hood and a red cape. So I turned in this, you know, fairly complete sketch, and they told me, oh, wait, no, it's a new Red Hood. We didn't tell you that. Oh, thanks.
Just waste your time a little bit. That's
so you had basically
literally about 2 hours later, they called me back and said, we've all decided we like this pretty well. Let's just go with this one.
Oh, good.
Oh, okay, because, you know, of course, it presented an image of what people would expect, and then you read inside, and it subverts that. It gives you a new version. So that kind of worked, you know. But then again, my buddy and former brother-in-law Bob Schreck was the editor on the book at that point, and so when we did the big reveal cover, you know, he said, we kind of talked about what it would be, that, you know, Batman would be holding the helmet, you know, and I said, oh, Bob, you got to let me have like a word balloon. They didn't do word balloons on covers very often those days, you know. And I wanted an old school, like 1850s, you know, you sort of word balloon, you know. And so, okay, we did it, and it was great. And then where was I? I think I was actually in New York for some sort of visit. And I live in Portland, Oregon, and I got off the plane, and there was a message from Bob, and he said, hey, call me, you know. And so I'm still in the airport, and I called him, and he said, all right, that issue's sold out. We want to go back to press. But, you know, we want to do an alternate cover. We want to flip it to where it's, you know, the Red Hood taking his own hood off, the own mask off, and you see Batman reflected in the – and, oh, that sounds great, man. Yeah, we need it in 24 hours.
Oh,
nice.
Oh.
I had to go home and paint that fucker in 24 hours. I turned it in the next day. And that wasn't Photoshop. That was paint. That was analog, as I like to say.
Wow.
I will say, you know, I didn't have to come up with a new design. I knew what the design was going to be. You know, it wasn't really hard to redraw it. But yeah, that was a down and dirty, get it done, get it out of here sort of approach.
So they really didn't have any idea that it was going to hit as big, and they needed to make a second print. I'd always wondered if, you know, because they always seem to have like these variants set up for the second and third and fourth printings.
Yeah, I'd say not so much back then. I think that kind of took them by surprise.
Yeah, they were the second printings back then were much more organic and really genuinely based on demand, not a publishing strategy of running the thing short and then having to have a second.
Yeah,
printing.
Exactly. So
gotcha. And also, I heard you mention earlier about how you loved Zorro, and I know, like, we were talking earlier about the Zorro and Django. Like, what was the deal with old Quentin Tarantino?
So, okay, that's a little bit of a lengthy lead-in. So Dynamite had a pretty good success with the revamp of the Lone Ranger. John Cassaday was doing the covers.
Amazing. They introduced
Sergio was doing the interiors.
Yeah, and it was a real neat approach. It really brought a youth and an energy to the character. This very old, almost stodgy kind of character. I had picked up a couple of those and really liked them. And then when I saw that Dynamite got the rights to Zorro, I just flipped out because I've always been a giant Zorro fan. One of my first exposures to Zorro was when I was about 12 or 13. Well, when I was quite young, I used to occasionally watch the Disney show because my dad was a big Western fan. But when I was about 12 or 13, I was living in in Delaware, actually, and we had UHF stations. Everybody remember those?
Yeah.
And one of our UHF stations on Sunday night had silent movie or silent cinema show.
Oh, man. So you saw the Fairbanks stuff?
I saw the Fairbanks stuff.
Wow.
Phenomenal. Now, it's really dated and weird in certain ways, but it's still just energetic and invigorating and just fabulous. I would say that, Douglas Fairbanks basically created the modern action movie with that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
There's a great bit in the first Anthony Hopkins, Antonio Banderas Zorro, where it's flashing back to when Anthony Hopkins was Zorro.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this little hop he does across a catwalk, and it's straight out of Fairbanks.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. I love that. I love the that first the Mask of Zorro. I love that one too. So anyway, I called. I've known Nick Barucci, the publisher of Dynamite, since he was a wee lad, and I called and said, "Hey, man, like Cassaday's doing your covers for Lone Ranger. Let me be your cover guy on Zorro. I love Zorro." And he called me back the next day. He said, "What do you think about writing it too?"
Score.
And at that point, I had fairly recently read. So there's a very famous Spanish-American author named Isabel Allende. She's kind of most famous for a book called The House of the Spirits. But in 2009, I want to say, or something like that, she wrote a novel just called Zorro. And it was basically her love of Zorro as a Latino hero. And it was just full of amazing shit. And so because Zorro Productions owned the rights to that, I was able to kind of cherry pick what I liked out of that. Now in the novel, he doesn't get into his costume to the last 40 or 50 pages. Can't have that in a 10 or 12 issue series. So I did it all in flashbacks. But I was able to, basically reference a lot of the amazing stuff she came up with. And so I wrote Zorro and did the covers for 30 plus issues, something like that. So then out of the blue, Nick Barucci approaches me and says, "Hey, we're talking about doing okay, let me just preface that by saying Django Unchained came out, and I just adored Django Unchained.
Yeah,
I love all Tarantino's films, but oh my God, Django was phenomenal. And he said, "Hey, we're talking with Quentin Tarantino's producer, Reggie Hudlin, about doing a Django Zorro crossover. Would you be interested in co-writing that with Quentin?" And I was like, never gonna happen. So sure, yeah, never gonna happen. Sure. Totally forgot about it. A couple months roll by, and all of a sudden Nick calls me again, very excited. He's like, "Look, we sent Quentin all of your Zorro shit, and he fucking loves it, and he wants you to come down to LA next week to talk about it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." Thoroughly shocked.
Yeah.
And I kept saying to my wife at the time, "This is going to fall apart at any second, right? This is going to be like, this is never going to happen, And so lined up, and I went down, and even as I was flying down there, I was picturing in my mind I'm gonna get there, and it's gonna be like, oh, sorry, man, Sam Jackson showed up. Can't do it today. And nope, pulled up at his house. They rang me in. He answered the door.
You went to his house. Wow.
Went to his house. Took me to see his comics like right away. As soon as we got in the door, he took me to see his comic collection.
Nice.
And I spent 2 days with him, hammering out the story. Awesome. When he first starts working with people, he likes to view movies together so that you get in the same mind frame, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he has this big, gorgeous screening room. He has a house way up in the Hollywood Hills. Used to be owned by William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And it has a bitchin' screening room, probably 60 people. Probably 60 people, and we watched movies for 2 days. And
how many samurai movies?
No samurai movies.
What?
It was so we watched this one swashbuckler I'd never seen called The Son of Monte Cristo, which was supposed to be a sequel to The Count of Monte Cristo, and featured a masked Zorro-esque kind of character. We watched 2 or 3 chapters of a couple of Zorro serials. And I will say everything was on either 16 or 35 millimeter. Nothing was on videotape. Wow. He has a big private collection. He had as a projectionist back in the projection room, whom I never saw.
Oh, really?
What?
Invisible projectionist. He was only
so
back
it might be child labor is what you're saying.
But then the most significant film we watched was one of Sam Fuller's first films called The Baron of Arizona, which is based on early Vincent Price film, and based on a real story of this crazy con man who tried this insane confidence game back in the 18 whatevers, where again, pretty much everything you see in the book is kind of based exactly on what this crazy fucker did to lay claim to the entire territory of Arizona as if he had the rights to this claim by a grant from the Spanish throne. And it was part of as America was pushing westward, they had a deal to honor, because of course the Western United States was all settled by Spain.
Yeah.
And they had a deal to honor any outstanding land grants made by the Spanish crown to Spanish nationals. So he set it all up to where he was going to be the Baron of Arizona. Now in the book, we changed that to the Archduke of Arizona just because that sounds more evil.
Yeah.
And we took it from there. And I was there for 1 day, and then I was flying out the next day, and there was no guarantee I was going to be invited back because who knows, I might be an asshole. And but no, he's like, no man, you got to come back the next day. You got to come back tomorrow. We got to keep working on this. So I went back to my hotel, and I sat down and wrote the first 5 pages overnight, and showed up the next day. I was like, look, man, here's how we start. And there it was. And yeah, it just all worked out.
So now,
awesome.
That's awesome.
I got to ask you, so you're in a screen room. Like now, did you guys drink?
Popcorn?
Yeah, popcorn. Is there anything
all right,
like
I got a funny story about it. Billy, great question. I'm
sorry.
We didn't drink till later in the day. We were serious. We were on it.
Yeah.
But at one point we were watching this film, and Quentin gets up to go take a piss, and he's gone a little longer than a piss, and I was like, where'd he go? And he comes back with this big bowl of popcorn, and he sits down next to me and just holds it over to me. Okay, Quentin just brought me some popcorn. That's great.
He came back.
Did your hands meet in the middle?
Oh, a meat cube.
You both went for the single raisinette.
Dude, that is the best. Taking the raisinettes and throwing them in the popcorn.
There you go.
Oh, heck yeah.
Another neat comic book thing is, Quentin and I are practically the same age, so we have a lot of cultural touch points that are the same. And he had just gotten back from San Diego, the San Diego Con, and he had bought a whole big stack of those Marvel black and white mags from the 70s. So like Deadly Hint, Fu, Tales of the Zombie, Dracula Lives. And man, I loved that shit when I was that age. So we just geeked out over that for quite a while. And then I said to him, hey, how did you walk around the San Diego Con and buy all this shit? He's so recognizable, you know? Mm-hmm. Wearing a Mexican wrestling mask.
No shit.
Nice.
Wow.
Hey,
in his alter ego.
That's incredible.
The reason I asked about the samurai movies is because he's pretty well known for having this massive, like, you know.
Sure, I'm sure he does, but he also had enough stuff that referenced exactly the Western sort of swashbucklers that we were trying to do.
Yeah, he's a huge spaghetti Western guy. Him and Rodriguez, they shared stuff that they had with each other. And you're right, he does collect all the stuff on the actual film. But
anybody that can get their hands on the Baron of Arizona, it's a fascinating film. This guy did crazy shit. He adopted this young Hispanic girl in America, and he sent her to a finishing school to become a lady, to learn all the ways of the aristocracy. In the meantime, he went to Spain. He joined a monastery. He was there for 10 years as a monk before he could get access to their private bibliothèque, their library, wherein were kept all the files for Spanish land grants. And he got in age-appropriate ink. He got into these fucking homes and forged this fake deed to her and her family. Then he went back and married her, and declared that she's the Baroness. She owns all of Arizona, and I married her, and I'm in those days, men owned everything. So I'm the Baron of Arizona. And it's
holy crap.
That's commitment.
Yeah,
that is commitment right there.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Wow. I thought forging notes from my parents was great. That's awesome.
Spent 10 to 15 years lining this shit up. Yeah.
Wow.
Hey, Nile, did you see Herwenberg's?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for a time to pop in with that.
It's so funny because Brian is looking up at you now when he talks to you.
I know.
In his picture.
With my daydream eyes.
Yeah.
Come, my child. So Herrenberg asks, Matt, there was supposed to be a kickstarted Grendel film back in 2012. The funding failed. Did the film ever happen? What was the story behind that?
First, I've fucking heard of it. I guess we call that.
I guess it didn't happen.
And
no idea. Never heard of it. That would have been a fan film.
Yeah,
probably.
If they would have released it commercially, I would have had to sue them.
During the time where
that said, I've been down the Hollywood development scene time and time again. I'm still there in the middle of it here and there, and hopefully someday that'll all work out. But yeah, I have no idea what the hell that was.
Yeah. Did you ever get approached for video games or anything like that, or have you?
Not really so much. No, more. They more want to. Those guys are looking more for either brand new material that they can fully exploit, or something that's already been turned into a film that already has a broader audience.
Yeah, there's no James Bond video game. One of my best friends who just passed away this past year was the president of IDOS, and it basically made Tomb Raider it. And he basically, to have meetings and stuff, and he's like, they're not going to opt you. They're not going to buy your character, when they can just create their own.
Yeah.
Video games are not buying anyone's characters unless it's
it has to already exist in some sort of
yeah. And it's it sucks, but what are you going to do? Now, when you get
did you say they don't have James Bond video games?
Not a James Bond video game.
Yes, there is.
There's been a bunch.
There's a bunch.
Not now. There's not one now. There's not one for the past 5 years or so.
Yeah, there's
nobody wants it.
The Daniel Craig GoldenEye game just came out 2 years ago.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'm sorry. Before that, then I apologize. There was one. They would just create their own.
Have you not heard of GoldenEye on Nintendo 64? It's still a classic.
Well, a decade ago there wasn't. They didn't think that he was commercial enough. I guess with
Billy, I just want to say something. What you think is a decade is like 20 years.
Yeah.
No. No, it's like a decade.
Levin is the pro gamer. He
definitely.
Well, there's it's going back to the samurai. Today is Toshiro Mifune's what would have been his 100th birthday.
Awesome.
The only man who should be legally allowed to wear a man bun.
Yes.
So do you remember that just because it's your son's birthday? Is that how you remember it?
My son's birthday was yesterday.
Oh, I saw the video today.
But no, I remember April 1st is Toshiro Mifune and Lon Chaney's birthday.
Oh. Wonderful.
Nice.
You're my heroes. So I it's just an interesting date.
Yeah.
You know, if they were like May 3rd, I probably wouldn't remember, but you're like, oh, it's a good date. So that's that. Date. So Brian, you were asking Matt in our pre-show. You had another question for him. Do you remember?
Which one?
I think you had a couple. That.
Say what now?
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, please ask a question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, the host must remain silent.
Yes. Matt, let me ask you now. So, what do you think of the state of the industry? We can't.
Sorry, say it again now.
I mean, what's your thought on the state of the comic industry as it is right now?
Man, I don't know. It's fucking confusing for me. I just keep my head down and keep telling stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course, with all this, with the Corona scenario, we're in for a lot of redefinition in many, many, many terms. I don't know what the state of comic book conventions are going to be now for a long time to come.
Yeah.
But you know, I think you know, it used to be back in the day we'd try and define what was unique about comics as opposed to film. Because, you know, Will Eisner was always big about defining the fact that they are just not the same thing.
Amen.
They're intensely related. They're close cousins, kissing cousins almost.
Sure.
But they're just not the same thing. And it used to be that, well, in a comic, you can draw anything. Anything can happen. Well, that's not the case anymore in a film. Anything can happen in a film now.
Yeah.
But you guys know as well as I do, when a person finally turns on to comics and discovers them, it can become obsessive, you know? And to my mind, what really distinguishes it is a certain intimacy, you know? In the fact that comics, even commercial comics, that are produced by a big and rotating team, that's still not many people compared to film, you know? You sit there and sit through those credits that run after one of the Marvel movies. Oh man!
Oh yeah.
You know,
hey, Matt. To that point,
the team that produces a comic, you feel an intimacy to their efforts. You feel it's almost like your favorite band. You know, your favorite group of five guys. You know, one guy's the drummer, one guy's the bassist, one guy's you know, etc. And so that's where I come down on the end of that equation.
Don't you think too that once you make that transition from being a fan to being a creator, there's a level of that intimacy that continues too. Maybe egalitarianism is a better word. Where if I come out with my, you know, hard scrap together indie comic and it's any decent at all, and they sit me next to an established guy like you at a convention, you'll end up talking to me. You're not looking down your nose at me.
Well, that's another thing I always point out is that, you know, comic conventions, if they survive, and I sure hope they do, because they're kind of a unique environment. You know, you can go to a comic convention, and aside from a very few superstars, you can walk right up to their table and meet them and shake their hand and say, "Hey, man, what's your shit?"
Yeah.
Do that to Kanye West. Can't do that to, you know, any of the big
Spielberg.
Can't do that to Spielberg.
Even if you come out with a moderate hit film, that doesn't say you're hanging out with Spielberg.
No shit. Yep.
Yeah.
So there is a collective intimacy there, like you said, Jeff, that I think really applies. And I don't know, you know, it's just it is egalitarian. It is. You got to remember that, you know, the great comic book creators were all hard scrabble guys in the Depression, you know, begins me, and they came up with these big dreams, you know. And I remember there was a documentary about comics back in the late '80s called Comic Book Confidential, and Sue Coe, who was a very kind of avant-garde comic artist. A lot of her stuff was published by Raw, Art Spiegelman. I remember her talking about how, you know, there's plenty of corporate comics, but corporations will never crush independent comics because you can always run your comics off on a Xerox nowadays on a home printer. You can always sell them yourself. You can always, you know, there's always an individual way to do it. And you know, that's true in the other art forms as well. It's true with bands. It's true with films. But particularly true with comics.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think there's one other thing, and you mentioned Will Eisner a minute ago, and I'm fortunate enough to have multiple conversations with Will and with Murphy Anderson, and both of those guys, at least a couple of times in different conversations, told me how many times comics had died in their careers.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And I take a lot out of that. I tend to be a silver lining guy anyway, in truth, but in all seriousness, I look around and I can't imagine how pent up the enthusiasm will be for comics when things get rolling again.
Indeed.
Oh yeah.
And I think that there's a lot on Marvel and DC as the industry leaders to respond to that. I think that we can say that the larger of the indie companies will respond well and creatively. And I know that a lot of creators are going to respond creatively with this. I don't mean to be the rosy-eyed optimist, but that's what I think.
Well, I think it's giving them time to actually get ahead. That's what it seems to be. A lot of creators are getting ahead.
I hope it with the big two companies, let's be honest here. The big two companies of the last several years have been mainly aimed towards producing comics that are going to lead the films.
Yeah.
And, hopefully they'll go back to something that is, again, like I said, a little more intimate, a little more individual vision. But Jeff, you were talking about Will Eisner there. I have a very heartwarming Will Eisner story. A lot of people have heartwarming Will Eisner. Of course,
yeah, sure.
He was a wonderful man. So so influential in every way. So I was lucky enough to be a presenter at the first Eisner Awards back in, can't even remember, 1980, blah, blah, 1980, blah, blah.
I remember it well.
It wasn't big. It wasn't big. I think there were probably 10 of us as presenters. And Will gets up at the beginning of it, it's the first one, and he gives this keynote speech where he talks about how much he loves this medium, how much potential he thinks it has, how it's such a wide open and unique art form, and how if just by lending his name to these awards, that in any way helps further this potential and further the efforts and aspirations of young artists, he feels so honored to be able to do that. Not a dry eye in the house.
Yeah.
Of course.
All of us were just like, oh shit, I want to go home and draw comics.
Yeah.
And so I was also up for a couple of things that year, but I didn't win anything. But after the awards are over, we all get up on stage for a photo op, and we're all lined up and we're taking shots. And my wife and I go back to our hotel, and that just happens to be where Will and his wife Ann are staying as well. And we get on the elevator all at the same time. Now, Will doesn't know me at all, really. And but he recognizes me from being on stage. And, he's beaming. He's just, he's just
being Will.
It's a ripe moment, And he looks over at me and he says, "Oh, congratulations." And I had to go, I didn't win anything, Will. Without skipping a beat, he leans over and gives me this grandfatherly squeeze on my shoulder and goes, "Yes, you did."
Oh man, wow. That's great. I got to tell you. I
got broke into tears, man.
Of course. I got out to San Diego, and because I come from a travel industry family, I always sent myself as the advance guy, no matter how many staff we had at Gemstone. We had upwards of 17 people at one point, and I'd still send myself because I traveled easier. I didn't get ruffled by the booth not being set up. Just all that stuff, right? Well, there was also, it overlapped with a 10-year period where I was required by law to sit next to the fat guy with the flu on the airplane.
Oh.
And I got it that year on the way out.
Oh.
And so I got the badges picked up for everybody. I got them to their hotels. And then I had to freaking go back to the convention center to get something. And I swear, I was dragging myself across the floor with one arm, just one of those. And Will walks by, and I know he didn't know my name, but he knew me that I was a Steve Geppies guy. And he goes, "Hey, how are you doing? Hang in there." And I felt better for an hour.
An infusion of energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, guys, I got to tell you, my computer's running low on juice here. So,
all right. Before we finish off, you had talked about the Comic Legal Defense Fund that you wanted to talk about. You want to give a quick little lowdown on it? We know what it is, but maybe for those of you that don't, and maybe where they can go to help contribute, because I think even today, with what's going on, that even creators are out of work and stuff like that. And I know they do primarily do things, for legal reasons to help people out. But them, like the Hero Initiative, they really are great charities to help creators, the people that actually make comics.
Yeah, I like doing work with both of those guys, both those groups. So the Legal Defense Fund, of course, is a First Amendment rights organization, that really does tremendous work with defending people who run up against the ugly specter of censorship in any way. But specifically in the world we find ourselves in right now and at this moment, the Legal Defense Fund has a lot of good information on their site about what creators can do in regards to benefits, unemployment, all sorts of stuff like that. And I'd encourage anybody who's feeling lost and out of sorts right now to go check out their site, and you can find good information there.
And that would be cbldf.org?
I
think so, yeah. If you just type in comic book legal defense,
Nile, can you put that in the...
We'll post that up.
We'll post that in. We'll also add that into the description of the show.
Additionally, my son and I did their membership art this year. So
nice.
The piece of art that's on all their tote bags, T-shirts, membership cards, all that sort of stuff. I drew it. My son colored it.
Mm-hmm.
We're always just very happy to help contribute to their cause.
Yeah, you're also trying to put together a fundraising piece of artwork that I think Billy contributed on already, right? Was that
the thing Dunbeer is doing? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I wish he's like, can you do this? And it was like the end of the day, and everyone else's is so much better than mine.
Is that why you made me draw it?
Dunbeer, who is at IDW, has been putting together a big jam piece. Billy's on it, Bill Sienkiewicz. Who else? Frank Cho, me. You remember anybody else, Bill? I can't remember anybody else.
Oh man, I saw. Yeah,
there's a bunch of good people on it.
Yeah, all the good guys are on it.
And Billy.
And me.
Yeah, and
yeah, me too.
You're right.
I tell you what, like seriously, it's been like 20 years in the making for me to get to ask you the questions. And man, I'm a huge fan of your stuff, big fanboy. I think it's awesome that you came on. I'm so happy that you messaged back so quickly. And just to let you know, like I also am a Zorro fan. I wasn't a huge Zorro fan, but when I saw Mark of Zorro, I actually loved Mark of Zorro so much that I have based the way that I view movies off of that, because I thought it was so good, the breakdown of that movie.
Are you talking the Hopkins version? That's the Mask of Zorro.
Yeah, a Mask of Zorro. Sorry, I meant to say Mask of Zorro. But like when he's training and Antonio Banderas wants to go fight immediately, and he's like,
really beautiful, terrific performances by everybody too. Great direction, great script. It's just a winner. My other favorite version I would point everybody to is 1941's The Mark of Zorro, Tyrone Power, and it's phenomenal as well.
Outstanding too. It is.
And I loved also in the Mask of Zorro how the villain laid out the plan.
Yeah,
no doubt.
You know what I mean? He laid out the
and
whole,
and it's understandable. It's understandable. You might do it.
Yeah. I was like, that's the way you do.
He's the shit out of a bunch of people, but he might do it.
Yeah.
God, he was like, I want to go kill this guy, and Anthony Hopkins like, he'll be in your circle soon enough. That really resonates with me, like always, like every time I'm watching something.
I got one more question, Matt. What is coming after the new Grendel?
Yes, thank you.
Another Grendel. I have the sequel already in mind. It will, and I also have something else. If everything gets up and rolling again, I have something totally unexpected pitched to Dark Horse as well.
Nice,
awesome.
That I would be writing, and another very famous artist would be drawing. Can't tell you more than that right now, but I can tell you that I have a new Grendel series that will follow on the tails. Everything I wanted to do with this Grendel was to shake up the universe, shake up the Grendel universe. I hadn't been in the Grendel universe for a while, so I thought, let's just go into outer space and let's see what that happens. and what happens after that is a kind of cool, unexpected follow up that I think everybody will really dig.
Unexpected is what we expect from that. and I lied.
Good,
I actually do have one more question. Given DC's other than the Batman films problems with getting great movies, have they had any talk about Dr. Midnight?
No, not that I know of.
That miniseries could go straight to the screen, man.
It could. I also think Sandman Mystery Theater would make a great TV show.
Oh my gosh!
Oh
yes.
yeah.
You got a terrific romance at the center of it, and it's a neat period piece. And aside from the period detail, you don't have a whole lot of special effects or anything. It's very noir. It just seems tailor made. But
is there a title from the? I know you just said you're looking at working on it. Is there a title in Marvel or DC that you either would have wanted to write or maybe still want to have the opportunity to write at some point?
Well, I tend to veer towards the dark cloaked characters. Of course, I've done Batman, I've done Grendel, and over at Dynamite, I did Zorro, I did Green Hornet, I did the Spirit, and I did the Shadow. So it's a lot of guys in cloaks and hats. I wouldn't mind if somebody let me have free reign on Superman for some sort of, but it'd have to be something where I wasn't tied into the continuity. I would just basically be doing my version.
Absolutely.
Like a reboot, like an Elseworld.
I hold my breath on that ever happening, but
like a Matt Wagner Elseworld story.
Yeah, basically. That's what Trinity kind of was.
Or just an added continuity, sir. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, man, boys, what do you say? This was fantastic.
Great. Thanks for coming on, Matt. And if you want to when your other stuff comes out, if you want to pop on and talk about it and plug it and promote it, you're more than welcome to come back on.
Right.
We'd love to have you on.
You guys on.
Definitely. All right, everyone.
Thanks for having me on, you guys.
Oh, excuse me.
It's been a great show. Very informative.
Yeah, my allergies. Everything's blooming.
That's it. 6 feet. 6 feet apart.
I promise none of you guys will get it from me through the screen.
Thank you.
Don't make promises you can't keep.
Yeah, true. Right. Well, Matt, thank you so much. You're a hero to us all. You really are.
Well, thanks
for all the inspiration. Thank you for all the great conversation. Thank you for one of our best shows ever.
I'll take that with
you're a mage.
You're a mage. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Matt. Thank you, J.C. Blevins. It's always a pleasure. Billy, you know what it is. And we will see you all again tomorrow night at 9 p.m. with Roland Mann and Caleb Toussaint. So everyone have a great night, and we will see you tomorrow.
All right, man. Stay safe, buddy.
Yeah, stay safe, everyone. Seriously, practice social distancing. This shit is real.
Mahalo.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Hey guys, thanks again for tuning into Crowdfunding Comics. We look forward to hanging out with all of our crowdfunding fans every time we go live. And don't forget to click the link below and subscribe to our channel. And there's a little bell. You may want to hit that too. This way you get all the great notifications when we go live and when we upload some awesome content. You want to follow us? Sure, go right ahead at Twitter at CrowdFundComics with an X, Instagram Crowdfunding Comics, and Facebook at Crowdfunding Comics. Till next time, crowdfunding fans, we'll see you soon.